Hello, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for joining me. Today I'm going to be talking about my summer reads. So this summer I read 7 books in total, and these are going to be the books that I read in July, August and September. I'm actually filming this during September, so September hasn't actually quite finished yet, but it's basically turned into autumn here because if you can't already tell, it's extremely overcast when I'm filming this, so I was like, you know what? I'm just going to get my summer reading wrap up done and then I'm going to get into my autumn reads. I'm definitely not really a summer reader in general. I feel like summer is always the time where I have massive reading slumps because I'm just so busy with other things that my reading kind of seems to take a bit of a backseat. So I actually read 1 book in July, 5 books in August, which is insane for me, and then only 1 book in September so far. And I'm filming this about mid-September, so I'm hoping to get a couple more books done this month. But yeah, the book that I have read so far this month took me 2 weeks to get through, so we'll see. Without further ado, let's get into the books. So the first and only book that I read in July was The Giver of Stars by Jojo Moyes, and this is a book that is set in Depression era America. I believe it's set in Kentucky, and it basically follows a woman who is originally from the UK, but she moves over to America to basically live with her now husband. So she meets her husband when he is traveling around Europe with his dad, and she hates her life in England. Like, she doesn't get on with her family and she's desperate for an escape. So when she meets this American man, she's more than happy to go home with him, get married and start a new life in America. However, when she gets there, it just isn't exactly how she thought it would be. She's living under her father-in-law's roof, and they're both very strict Christians and very much believe that a woman's place is in the home and that she should just be there to kind of bear children. Instantly, she's not quite sure if she's made the right decision. But what the main part of the plot is about is basically there is this mobile library that gets started up in the town, and the idea is that it will be run by women who ride on horseback and are able to provide books to families in more rural areas of the community so that their children can learn to read and can be educated themselves. And Alice, who is our main character, decides to volunteer for this service because she's actually already trained in horseback riding, and she ends up meeting a lot of other women through doing this and gets to know the other families around town. I actually ended up giving this book a 3.5 stars. I really liked the location and the atmosphere, especially the horseback riding I really enjoyed, and the kind of location of the mountainous Kentucky. I really enjoyed that aspect of the book, and I did like the library aspect as well. I feel like most book lovers like the idea of a travelling library, but for me it was just a little bit slow in general. And I wouldn't say I was completely connected to all the characters. I didn't mind the main character, and I did particularly like one of the side characters called Marjorie O'Hare, who you spend a lot of time with as well. But I just felt the pacing was a little bit slow, and it definitely was a little bit longer than I think it needed to be. I definitely say if you're looking for female-focused books that are very much centred around female empowerment and female friendship, this is definitely one to keep on your radar. I did enjoy it for the most part, it just wasn't one of my favourites. The next book I read was Educated by Tara Westover. This is a memoir about a girl who basically grows up in an extremely strict Mormon household to the point where they're actually preparing for doomsday, so they are very cut off from society as a whole. They homeschool their children, they don't believe in traditional medicine or hospitals, so the mother is trained in midwifery and also trained in kind of like herbal remedies. And it's basically about this girl who grows up in that environment, and I would say the memoir is kind of split in 2 halves. You've got the first half, which is about her family life and her being brought up in this environment where she was very much kind of separated from the rest of society. And then the second half is when she decides that she wants to get an education herself, a formal education, because for the first 17 years of her life, she's completely homeschooled and self-taught. Whereas when she turns 17, she decides that she wants to get into university and she really tries to make this happen. And that's very much the second half of the book, where it talks about her academic success. And as she's exposed to this educated worldview, how her view of her parents and her family changes. I would say for this book, massive trigger warning for physical abuse, because there is some quite graphic scenes where Tara is physically assaulted, so I would just go in knowing that if you think that's something that's going to trigger you. However, I would say I really enjoyed this book. I end up giving it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I think for me, at some points I felt it to be a little bit disconnected. There's quite a big jump between her family life and then her university life, and I definitely feel like there are maybe a few gaps where it's kind of difficult to understand how you get from one to the other. And also I would say that as much as this book is called Educated, I think it's definitely a lot more about her family and her obligation to her family, and I found that absolutely fascinating. If you really enjoy reading memoirs that have a central theme of family and especially obligation to your family, I would definitely recommend this one. It was really interesting to see how, even though her family did not treat her well at all growing up, and especially as she became an adult and she started becoming educated herself, they started to treat her even more poorly. It was really interesting to see how she still had that deep will to be connected to her family and keep them in her life, even if it wasn't necessarily what was best for her. I really enjoyed that aspect of the book and I found it really interesting. But yeah, I personally really enjoyed this. I gave it a 4.5 star, and I definitely recommend it if you're on the lookout for a really good memoir, especially one that is a little bit of a tearjerker, for me at least towards the end. As much as there are some really shocking and horrible parts of this book, the bit that actually made me cry was really the last section, when you're really seeing how much all of this has affected her over such a long period of time, and she's really coming to terms with all of that and deciding what path she wants to take for her future, which I found really moving and very powerful. I really wanted to get some summer reads in, so I decided to read Nora Goes Off Script by Annabelle Monaghan, and this is my first book by her, and I'm not exactly rushing to read another one because I found this really disappointing. I ended up giving it a 2.5 stars out of 5, so yeah, I was really let down by this. It basically follows a single mum who writes a screenplay about her divorce, and when they're filming this film, they decide to film it actually at her house, and the lead actor decides to end up staying on her lawn because he likes to stay in his camper van. It's not a camper van, it's like a more fancy truck than that, but I can't think what they're called. But he stays in his fancy truck and he insists on kind of like staying on her lawn. And basically once filming wraps up, he goes missing, and it basically turns out that he is asking her if he can stay for a little bit longer because he just needs to get away from the hustle and bustle of his acting career and wants to kind of just experience some normalcy for once. And obviously it's a romance, so you can kind of put the pieces as to what ends up happening, but I just really didn't like them as a couple. And I think for me, when you're reading a romance, something that sells it to you as a romance is you have to like the couple, and I just found the couple in this book a little bit boring and just quite bland. It was quite insta-love. The actual timeline was very short for them supposedly kind of falling for each other, and I just didn't really buy it. I didn't really see their chemistry, and yeah, something just wasn't clicking for me. I'm also not going to spoil anything, but in a lot of these romance books there's kind of like a miscommunication or an argument or something that kind of happens that obviously has them have this fallout and then they get back together. That's kind of the usual trope of romance. And I just didn't like how this book did it. I'm not going to spoil what happens, but I just hated it. Absolutely hated it. It really grinded my gears. I already wasn't really enjoying the book at this point, and that just really just sent me over the edge. So yeah, I ended up giving it a 2.5 stars. There were some aspects that were redeemable, like some of it was quite cute and I did like some of the lines, but just in general I really didn't like this book and it was just really disappointing for me. I wouldn't recommend it. I then decided to read the 4th installment of the Heartstopper series, and I never really know what to say about these books because I obviously don't want to spoil the series for you. But this was definitely a book in the series that started to get a lot deeper in its themes and a lot more serious, which I actually really appreciated. If you don't know what this series is about, it's a graphic novel series. It follows 2 teenage boys who essentially fall for each other in the first book, and then the rest of the books are about how their relationship develops and the kind of trials and tribulations that they face, especially considering they are a gay couple. And I really like this book. I think the heavier topic was presented really well. I'm really glad that there is the notion that just because you love someone doesn't mean that you're the sole person who can help them, and when things do get serious you really do need to seek out professional help, and especially as a teenager it's not down to you to support your partner completely. Sometimes it is necessary to get professional or adult supervision involved, especially when things do get serious. And yeah, I just really like this book. I ended up giving it a 4.5 stars. I've actually got the 5th book, and I believe the 6th book comes out this year. So when the 6th book comes out, I am probably going to get a physical copy so that I can continue the series. And I think that's the last book in the series. Please correct me if I'm wrong. But I absolutely love the series. I've read 2 of the books this year. I'm really enjoying slowly making my way through. I'm not sure if I'll try to read the 5th book before the year ends, or if I'll kind of save it for next year just to keep the series going a little bit longer. But yeah, I'm really enjoying it. I think it's a really lovely graphic novel series, and if you're looking for graphic novels, I would definitely recommend this series. Continuing with my romance theme, I then decided to read When in Rome by Sarah Adams, and this is actually the first Sarah Adams books that I read as well, even though I do have a couple of them on my Kindle. And again, I was a little bit disappointed by this one as well. I don't know if Emily Henry has kind of just set my expectations a little bit too high for a summer romance. I know that Emily Henry's books are a little bit more literary fiction leaning, but yeah, I just think sometimes then when I read just a pure romance, I do find it to be a little bit insincere at times, and I just don't exactly buy the romance because I don't feel like I know the characters well enough. This book follows a burnt out pop star called Amelia, who basically decides to go to Rome, Kentucky, not Italy, and she ends up meeting a baker and essentially asks if she can just hide out with him for a little bit to get away from celebrity life. Now that I'm saying it, this one is really similar to Nora Goes Off Script. I will say this one is significantly better in my opinion. It has dual POV, which I really enjoyed because I think it did help flesh out the characters. But again, I just wasn't completely sold on their story. I did feel like it was quite rushed in terms of them falling for each other, and I just don't know if I really like the grumpy sunshine dynamic. That was kind of one of the tropes in this, and to be honest, if you like that dynamic, you might really like this book. I just think I was reading it and I was like, maybe I don't like that as a trope because I just didn't love it. I don't know, I didn't really connect with the couple that much, and I just wasn't that bothered. I do have the 2nd book in the series, which is called Practice Makes Perfect, and it's kind of on my radar to still maybe pick this up at some point, but I'm not exactly rushing for it anymore because this book was just a little bit disappointing for me. I also put in my review on Goodreads that I didn't really like the writing style, and I can't exactly remember what it was about the writing style that irked me, but it kind of confirmed to me that I don't think I'll be going back to this author anytime soon. Maybe next year in summer I'll give it another go, but I'm probably going to prioritise some other summer reads next year rather than another book by this author, which was quite disappointing because I do have a couple of her books on my Kindle. So yeah, a bit disappointing that I didn't really connect with this one. I ended up giving it a 3.5. I did really like the ending, and there were some elements of it that I enjoyed, but it just wasn't my favourite romance, and I don't know if I'd exactly recommend it. I think there are better romances out there. I then read a book club book, which was The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. Oh my god, that is such a mouthful. Yeah, a bit random to read this in summer, but to be honest, it actually really broke up my summer reading. Like I said, I was kind of on this summer romance binge and it just wasn't working for me, so I was actually really glad to read something that was so far removed from that. This is a horror book. Basically follows this mum called Patricia, and she decides to join a book club and makes all these friends through her book club, and someone then comes to their town who is new, and things just don't quite seem right. And obviously by the title of the book, you can probably imagine what is quite wrong with this person that has come into the town. I really enjoyed this book. I think I definitely enjoyed it a lot more in the first half than I did the second half. Some of it started to irk me a little bit as the book went on, because it's very much the sort of book that will make you so frustrated. I really appreciated that as much as there were horror elements in terms of gore and genuine horror tropes, I really liked that a lot of the horror was actually very human and realistic. For instance, one of the most horrific things about this book was the idea of just not really being believed, especially because you're just a housewife, you're just a woman. Why would we believe you? Obviously what you're saying isn't true. And yeah, that really got to me. I actually didn't realise how scared I was of that until I read it in a book and I was getting absolute chills. But yeah, it's definitely the sort of book you get a bit frustrated with, because kind of like a lot of horror movies, it feels like no one is doing the right thing. And I think at first I was so engulfed with the atmosphere and the dark and eeriness of this book that I was just absolutely loving it. I really was engrossed with the story. But then kind of as it went on, especially in the kind of second third of it, I feel like it did start to drag on a little bit for me. However, I will say the ending did really pick up again and I did enjoy it. I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5 stars, and I definitely want to read more horror books. I think reading books like Sharp Objects and now this book as well, it's really made me realise that I do quite like a dark and atmospheric, creepy book. And I definitely want to kind of lean more towards dark mysteries and horrors in the future. I mean, it's perfect time to be saying that because obviously autumn is literally around the corner, if not already starting. So I'm really excited to hopefully read some darker books in the autumn and winter months, because I'm kind of realising that I do have quite a soft spot for that genre, and it's not necessarily something I've really explored much of before, but I'm really keen to delve more into that. Also, I didn't say, but this book is set in the kind of 80s and 90s, so it also has that kind of like 90s Buffy vibe, which I quite liked. It's very much suburbia in the south, and that's why I really enjoyed the kind of like atmosphere and just the vibe of this book. I think it's a really good autumn read if you're kind of looking for something that honestly is very gross. I say if you're squeamish, it is really, really disgusting at points. However, I'm actually really squeamish, like ridiculously squeamish, and I was fine. Just maybe be careful if you're listening to it on audio, because I think it can be a lot easier to kind of visualize it if you're listening to it on audio. And we actually had someone in our book club had to pull over her car because it was so graphic and she couldn't drive whilst listening to it. So maybe bear that in mind. But yeah, like I said, I really enjoyed this book. Definitely great for autumn vibes and just a really creepy, eerie book that has a lot of depth. And then the final book that I read this summer was going back to a summer romance, because I had to finish with a summer romance, and that was going back to my trusty Emily Henry, and I finally read A Funny Story. Now, I'd had this on my TBR for ages. It was the sort of book that when I first heard people talking about it, I believe it came out last year, and when I heard people talking about it, I really liked the vibe of it. I thought it would be right up my street, and it really was. To be honest, I think I would have rated it even higher if I'd have read it when I wasn't quite so busy, because it did take me 2 weeks to get through because I've just had an absolute hectic time in my personal life recently. It's just been absolutely crazy. So it did take me a while to get through, and I think that did slightly damage the rating a little bit for me. If you don't know what this book is about, it's basically about a woman who is engaged and her fiance decides to get with his childhood girl best friend at his bachelor party. And they decide to get together and run away. He basically says to his fiance, "We're getting together, we're going to go on holiday for a week, so you'll have time to clear out your things and get out basically of my house, because she's going to be moving in with me, so you need to be moving out." And she decides to actually move in with the girl best friend's boyfriend. So you kind of have like the two couples, and these two get together, so then them two move in together. That's basically what happens. Honestly, this concept is absolute rom-com energy, and I loved that. They basically get a save the date in the mail, both of them, and they're like, you know how we could just mess with them right now? Why don't we go to their wedding? That'll be really funny, because we're obviously completely heartbroken. And they basically decide to pretend that they're dating to try to make the other couple jealous, and I loved it. I'm realising that I really like fake dating. The thing is, I'm like slowly starting to read more romance books, and I'm understanding what tropes I like and what tropes I don't like, and fake dating is definitely one that I really enjoy. I just find it so goofy and silly, and I feel like it just brings a lightheartedness to the book that I really enjoyed. So you have Daphne and Miles, who are the kind of couple that we follow in this book, and obviously they start as roommates and they start this fake dating, but as fake dating always goes, there ends up being a bit more of a connection than they initially thought. And yeah, I really, really enjoyed this book. I ended up giving it a 4.5 stars. It wasn't quite a 5-star read for me, and I think that was because it just took me a little bit longer to get through. And like I said, I don't know if that's just because I had a lot going on, or maybe there was a little part of me that just wasn't absolutely loving it and wanted to binge it. However, I did still really, really enjoy it. I really liked the two main characters, and I really liked their chemistry together. And yeah, I just absolutely love the premise. I feel like it's classic rom-com energy. I think with Emily Henry books in general, they are just absolute rom-com movies and I love it. I would honestly recommend any of her books if you're looking to get into romance and you kind of want something that has a little bit more of a literary fiction element, but it's still very much rom-com energy. I just personally really enjoyed this. I liked all the characters, I liked the plot, I liked the premise, and yeah, I just really enjoyed it. So those are the 7 books that I read this summer. Like I said, summer is always a very weak reading season for me because I'm just so busy and doing other things. I really don't prioritize reading. I also just think that I read so much more when it's cozy and it's dark and you just spend a lot more evenings on the sofa curled up with your book. So yeah, I didn't actually read a whole lot this summer, but I still feel like I did read quite well and yeah, had a bit of a slump, but I think I'm kind of out of it now and I'm reading better books again, which I'm really enjoying. Please let me know what your favourite summer reads have been this season and if you've got any autumn recommendations for me for next season, and I hope I see you in my next video. As always, like this video if you liked it and feel free to subscribe to my channel if you want to see more, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!